Hello, everybody. I'm here today with Fiona Girkin, who I first interviewed about 4 months ago when she was working at the University of Tasmania, teaching police about domestic violence. Hello, Fiona. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Bettina. Nice to be back.
A lot has happened between now and then. Perhaps you'd like to tell people about this very exciting period of your life.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of change since we last spoke. I'm no longer working at the university and no longer teaching police about domestic violence. I made the decision to go back to working for myself as a consultant. Previously, before working at the university, I was doing management leadership consulting with a focus on toxic female behaviour, and I've decided to go back to that because I realise there's a lot of people out there that need that kind of specialist help.
I think we should probably go back to the beginning. How did you decide to get into a thesis on this area?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting because initially I didn't understand that psychopaths could be everyday people, could be people that are your boss or, someone who works next to you in an office. And I was having a really bad experience at a work situation, and it was causing me a lot of distress. But at the same time, I was also watching I listened to a lot of true crime, and I was listening to this book called The Wisdom of Psychopaths by a gentleman by the name of Kevin Dutton. And he mentioned that psychopaths could be more than just people who are, serial killers. They could be much more than that. And so listening to him, I realized that what I was working with were actual psychopaths in the workplace.
What were you doing in the community sector? Your sort of professional experience up to that point?
Yeah, so my background is in psychology and counselling. I've done family mediation and worked with a lot of separated couples, but also worked in leadership and management positions where I've supported people through leadership roles, including in the disability and community services sector in Tasmania.
You were in this profession, the community services area, which is mainly women, of course, and you became aware not only of your own problems you were running into with one particular person, but that there were a lot of difficult women there causing problems in the workplace. So you realised it was a more widespread problem.
Yeah, so I found myself talking to other people in the sector about what was going on for me. And what I was hearing back was information from people that they'd had similar experiences, not just with these same women, but with other women in the sector. And I started to sort of gather some really anecdotal evidence around this is a real problem. And these women that I spoke to, I mean, I was struggling myself, but some of these women I spoke to had experiences, 5, 6, 7 years earlier, and they were still very depressed and grieving. It had
Mhm.
been really difficult for them, and I thought, no, I want to look into this further. This is an area I'm really interested in. I was at the time doing a doctorate on public value in the community services sector, and I actually ended up withdrawing from that so I could move over to this topic.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating topic, and particularly these very female workplaces. I've been hearing about them for years. I was looking for, doing some research for interviewing you, Fiona, and I was looking at nursing, for instance, is something that comes up a lot. Very female-dominated industry. I remember years ago I was involved a weekly bridge group, and one of our little group was a woman who'd had, very senior experience, management experience. She gets put into a nursing role in one of the nursing colleges. Boy, did she run into trouble. Also, every week we heard some ghastly story from her. And when I was researching this, I discovered there's actually journal articles about nurses eating their young. So this is a well-recognised problem of bullying. And of course, it applies, as you say, it applies in a lot of these industries which are female-dominated. You get these, what I see as mean girls growing up. We're talking about, all know that in any schoolyard with teenage girls, there are girls who are really good at bullying other girls. I mean, there's been lots of research on this, and so some of the women we're talking about here are simply women who've moved into an adult role and behaving the same sort of way. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. It's under like a personality disorder, and personality disorders are usually consistent. They're not something that changes over time. So what can happen is people learn these behaviors and start these behaviors at a very young age. There's usually signs, and there's a lot of cases I've looked at that have been well documented that actually show the early signs. I mean, even the Erin Patterson case recently, everyone knows about the mushroom lady. There's signs in her past that she was very unruly and psychopathic in nature. So it does start early. And what happens is these people find that there's a lot of benefit and reward from being psychopathic and being nasty and ruthless. And so they continue that behavior and it escalates over time. But it does start in childhood with, yeah, mean girl attitudes.
So I think we probably need to point out that we've got a bit of a spectrum here. I mean, obviously there are people who are just bullies, and maybe not always, but in certain situations, through to people who are female psychopaths. We better explain what you see as the psychopathology and how you define that.
Yeah, of course. And someone who is a psychopath, they have a series of behaviors that are on a continuum. So, one of the key things is they lack self insight. They don't have any empathy. They can be very, very likable and charming. So, they kind of reel you in a way. I always think about it like the Trojan horse, the gift that was brought in, but that was full of army men that eventually came and escaped and killed everybody. It's much the same way. These people come in and people want to employ them. They're so likable. They've got skills up the wazoo, usually because they lie about what skills they have. And once they're in, that's when they infiltrate. And ability to blame others for their bad behaviour. They've always got an excuse. And certainly in women, we also see that high level of victimhood behaviour, that when they do get called out, they play the victim. And it's much harder to discipline a victim than it is to discipline a perpetrator.
Let's
But I
talk
get
about. Sorry, you go on, Fiona.
I was just going to say that I guess with the behaviour, like I said, it is on a continuum. So it might be that someone has low level traits, but they're more of just a bully than they are a psychopath. And I think it's about remembering that all psychopaths are bullies, but not all bullies are psychopaths. So it's just about remembering there is a difference and it is a continuum, and not everyone who is a bully fits into that spectrum.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Now, if we're talking about this behaviour, they talk about relational aggression. Give me examples of how they might behave in the workplace. What do they do?
And so I remember there was someone I've worked with who talked about the fact that she was always scheduled to man the phones at the front desk at lunchtime, and all the other women in the workplace would go out to lunch together. So she was never invited. And when she complained about that, people said, oh, it was because you were working on the front desk. But she knew that she was always the one scheduled when they would do this on purpose. So she wasn't asked to go. So it was a deliberate behaviour, but it was used as, oh, we didn't realize we were doing that, sorry. But a lot of that really ruining someone's social standing is, and it's quite damaging to women.
I mean, that's one of the things when I was doing a bit of research into this. We all know that women's workplace relationships are extremely important. In fact, one of the major criteria in determining whether they're happy in their job is how they get on with other people at work. Making their lives miserable at work, that's going to have a real effect, particularly on women, because it means so much to them, doesn't it?
Yeah, and women put so much more emphasis on relationships. And during my study, I interviewed both men and women who'd had experiences with toxic women. And certainly, I certainly found that the women really struggled a lot more. I think as women, we rely on that friendship and that togetherness and support for each other. So when that doesn't work, it becomes really, really hurtful. There was an example that a male I interviewed gave me where he said that when he was being targeted by the psychopath, he discovered that if he made himself put himself in a place where he had no resources that she wanted, she would leave him alone, and she did. So he just made himself so useless to her in the workplace that she stopped bullying him, and that worked for him. Whereas I think if a woman tried that tactic, I'm not sure it would work quite as well, because the psychopath would feel like she's being rejected.
I mean, this is a difference. I mean, not that men don't get upset by being bullied in the workplace or whatever, but it's this the the amount of emphasis we put on that aspect of our jobs and our working environment that makes us particularly vulnerable, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think men are very task focused. Men are very purpose focused, get the job done, whereas women are more focused on relationships and social interactions. And I think
Hmm.
that's where we differ gender wise, that causes these different conflicts in the workplace and causing that
Hmm.
high conflict in those female workplaces.
Yeah. I mean, these women you knew, which inspired you, these mean girls who inspired you to go and do this thesis, are they still in their jobs now?
Oh, yeah. Yes, yes, they are, and continue to get promoted. And certainly in my study, when I talked with a number of cases, the people had been promoted, the women had been promoted to a higher position.
Yeah.
And sometimes what they'll do is they'll get rid of the victim and they'll promote the psychopath because that's easier. And because the psychopath's willing to do some of the work that other people aren't, such as, sacking large numbers of people and still sleeping at night, sometimes they make themselves so indispensable to an organisation that an organisation finds it easier to keep them than to go up against them, because to go up against a psychopath in any situation can be really difficult because they are very strategic and they don't give up.
And they often, as we've said, establish networks of other people who are like-minded,
Mm.
and protect them. You said to me that they often maintain their position by controlling resources. That's how they get into these very powerful positions.
Yeah, so they make themselves so indispensable that they can't get rid of them. So they make sure that they are indispensable. They also make sure that they're really good friends with people at the top. And this is something I saw a lot, both myself in my personal experiences, but also in the people I interviewed for my study, is that they knew who to engage and who to create strong relationships with to maintain their job, because
Mhm.
those people would protect them, and they did. And they did
Mhm.
protect them. So,
I mean, did you come across the lesbian mafia? I mean, no one talks about that, but I mean, publicly, but I've heard it all my life. People who've come across, uh, networks of women who are lesbian women working together who are very exclusionary. Have you come across that?
yes, I have. And certainly my experience that led to this PhD was that this idea
Mm.
of this lesbian mafia. And it's almost as though it's a group of women who band together, who work together to take down other women and men to get what they want. And
Mm.
they're very strategic and they're very clever. And if you're not part of that in crowd, and if you don't stay part of the in crowd, so you could be part of the in crowd and then end up out, your head's on the chopping block. You're gone. You're either fired, bullied out. Your life's made so miserable that you don't stay, and
Mm.
the job becomes untenable.
Yep. I mean, of course, we're not saying that all lesbians are like this. I mean, plenty of,
No.
plenty of feminists, plenty of lesbians, whatever, who behave perfectly normally, in collegial workplaces. But there is, I mean, it's just too much of a coincidence to the fact that I've been hearing this from um, people working in big workplaces. As we know, women tend to get to the to executive positions who are more likely not to be married women with children. They're more likely to be single women. There's research showing that very clearly. And one of the things that's always worried me is the women at the top in our big bureaucracies, the women making decisions of not to spend any money on male suicide or not to spend any money on boys' education. Some of those are, for instance, lesbians who are very hostile to men who have a vested interest in not wanting to help males. And yet, this is a total taboo. I mean, Fiona, one of the things that really interests me about this topic is that it's so taboo, and I'm sure you realise that it's when you tell people the topic that you did your thesis in this area, you must get quite a reaction.
I've had men in the sector who have contacted me in private and gone, "Are you sure you want to do this? This is dangerous."
Mm.
I've had other men contact me in the sector, and other people within the sector who have said, "I've heard rumours that people are talking about your PhD." And this was before I finished, and I'm
Mm.
really scared for you. They
Yeah.
were actually scared for my welfare. And I think, if people saw the ABC article that came out about me after the interview with you, women who spoke about me quite negatively, it's that kind of behaviour that I studied, and people just coming after women who they just don't like. And
or people who are saying things that they don't want to hear, like
yeah,
you. Yeah.
yeah. They call it willful blindness, where you just don't want to hear it because it jeopardizes, and it's certainly in the feminist industry and the community sector, it jeopardizes millions of dollars worth of funding because it jeopardizes what you've created. And that is a man hating industry that doesn't support men and only supports women.
Yep, that's right. And we can think of innumerable areas like that. I mean, one of the things I thought about when I decided I wanted to talk to you about this was the fascinating. There was an inquiry held into Parliament House after the Brittany Higgins allegations that she was raped in Parliament House, and that inquiry, big hullabaloo, lots of money, was supposed to be looking at sexual harassment, bullying, and sexual assault in the workplace. And what they found? They found 42% of people had been bullied compared to 24. I mean, almost double, twice as many had been bullied as had experienced sexual harassment. And there was only less than 1% who'd had actual or attempted sexual assault. So the biggest problem that big inquiry came up with was bullying. The media barely mentioned it, of course. If you looked at the actual incidents, 61% of the bullying was by women, and 76% of the repeat offenders, when it was an ongoing problem of bullying, was women perpetrators. Nothing, no mention of this. They had all these follow-up, recommendations, and the report was supposed to have all sorts of consequences, and the bullying was just absolutely buried. And that sort of says it all to me. They don't want to know. Our community, our feminist-led, public dialogue doesn't want to acknowledge that there is a major problem of women in the workplace who are causing trouble for other women.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. I think, it's well known. Like I said, it doesn't matter which woman you speak to, everyone's got a story, everyone knows about it, but it's not something that's considered.
All right, so you're now setting yourself up to help people in this situation. So
Yes.
help people who are being bullied, who are dealing with someone who's making their life miserable in the workplace.
Yeah, and I'm also hoping to incorporate some of the stuff we talked about last time. So I'm going to continue my work around a humanistic approach to domestic violence and my approach to understanding female perpetrators of domestic violence. That's something that's really important to me, and I really feel like that's part of my purpose and want to continue that work as well.
But let's just talk a bit more about how do you help someone who's in a situation and there's a bully who's making their life miserable.
Yeah, I'm happy to give you a bit of an example if you like. So, before I go into that example, I guess the main things I can do is help with things like counselling, talking through some of the issues, looking at strategies, helping with some of the responses to make sure that you're responding appropriately, that you're not responding in a way that can get you in trouble. Because often what you find is victims will become the people that end up being complained about because they're trying to deal with the situation, and the psychopath will often see the victim as an opportunity to complain about them and paint themselves as the victim. So that's really common. And there's an example of that. I can give you an example of a client I work with a number of years back now, because it was just such an amazing story, and I still hear from this woman. She's amazing. So she worked at an organisation which her role was based on her having a work visa. So she had a work visa that was tied to her employment. And the manager suddenly decided she didn't like her anymore and started to performance manage her and was giving her these documents about things people had said about her. But none of it really had any weight and certainly weren't complaint worthy or performance management worthy. And she was someone I'd contacted for an academic reason, and we started chatting, and so I started to help her with this situation and said, look, I can actually help you get through this. What we ended up doing was I helped her with her response to her employer to make sure that she took the emotion out of it, because that's a hard thing when you're being bullied by someone, is to not put that emotion into it. You've got to put the specific facts. So I helped her through that process. We managed to get her a settlement, and an end date that was a day after she would have been deported back to a war-torn country where she had not been for 20 years. And they knew that, but they did not
Mm.
care. But I said to her, you need to get them to give you an end date where you would become a permanent resident. And we managed to do that. And she still rings me today sometimes and goes, thank you so much for not getting me deported.
Yeah,
Um, but one of the
good.
other things, I mean, her English wasn't her first language, so being able to help her with some of that writing and response, and understanding what this person, what the organisation was trying to say to her was really important. And she's moved on to a new job now, and like I said, yeah, she's a permanent resident now, and that was a really certainly always stuck with me, that case.
You must have to know a lot about people's legal situation and whether they are they likely to be dismissed, what are, all those aspects when it comes to advising people. Is that right?
Yeah, so usually I recommend that people have a lawyer.
Yeah,
So I'm not a lawyer and I can't give legal advice, but I can certainly help them sit down and work out where they sit in terms of the next response. So some people might
yeah.
ask me about, should I be putting in a complaint? Should I be going on workers' comp? And obviously my approach is, obviously I do expect people to get legal advice, like I said, not a lawyer. But what I can help with is with some of that practical stuff and some of the emotional torment that comes with it, just sitting and having a chat about what it's like for them emotionally, which you don't get from legal representatives because, they
Yeah.
don't have the time and they're very costly. So I guess I provide a cheaper option to be able to work through some of those emotions so that you're not getting heightened in the workplace to the point where you then become disciplined for your behavior, because that is really common as well. People get so frustrated, they end up acting out and end up
Mhm.
becoming the one being disciplined.
Yeah. But what about the perpetrators? Can mean girls be cured?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, and I've done quite a bit of research on that. And everything I read, I mean, are some studies that say yes, but most studies say no. And the reason is, I mean, like I said earlier, it's a permanent thing. So if someone has continued this behaviour over time, often they are not able to self-reflect on the damage they've done. They might just try and do things differently if they haven't gotten away with something, they're going to try something different next time. So often they'll manipulate the therapist if they do go to counselling. I think you can minimise the damage, and I think it's in many ways it's about you looking at your own behaviour because you can't change the behaviour of others. But I think it's about organisations protecting themselves and making sure they have good policies and procedures in place to make sure these people aren't able to bully other people and perform behaviour that really brings an organisation undone.
Mhm. Well, a good start would be to acknowledge the problem, wouldn't it, Fiona? So I'm
Yeah.
very glad you're out there, and I'll be interested to hear whether you do get a lot of response to this in terms of people wanting to talk through situations they're encountering in their workplaces. But, we have a big job to do in changing our culture when it is so intent on denying that women never, denying that women ever do anything wrong, let alone all pervasive problem like that,
Mm.
where the evidence is very clear how much damage these women are doing. But because they're women, they're protected.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because I had a few people say to me when I started my PhD, oh, but you're attacking women. I said, no, I'm not. I'm actually protecting women. I'm protecting the victims that are being attacked by other women. This is not about me attacking women. This is about me protecting them,
Yeah,
because they need protection from those women who seek to bring them down.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'll be interested to keep in touch with you, Fiona, and I'm sure many people watching this will be pleased to know you're still out there and happy and cheerful and moving on with your life after what has been a pretty traumatic few months.
Yeah.
Um, we'll
But
keep in touch. Mm.
we will. Yeah. I believe everything happens for a reason, and I'm really excited for this new journey, definitely.
Great. Thanks so much, Fiona.
Thanks, Bettina.